I set my preaching plans about a year in advance, and so late last year I decided I needed to do a series on anxiety. It seemed to be an issue that was being talked about a lot in the media, and seemed like a significant challenge in our society. And I've done this before, but the trouble is once I put it on my plan, I forgot about it. And there was lots of other things happening, plenty to keep myself busy, until I came to this week and started researching this topic and realised that this was actually quite a complex subject. This was not going to be as simple as I thought. So now I had a double problem. I was feeling anxious about doing a series on anxiety. This did not seem like a very good combination. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on the subject. I'm not a counsellor. Ros gave me some really good material to look at from a counsellor's perspective. This is the first time I've done a series on this specifically. I also took some time off recently for my own mental health. It's been a bit of a struggle over the last couple of months. I've shared before my own journey with depression, and of late it's been a bit of a struggle. And there are some links between anxiety and depression. So those are my disclaimers. If you're looking for an expert who's living in perfect spiritual and mental wholeness, you should probably find a different preacher. If you're hoping I'm going to give you some quick magical fixes with a few Bible verses, you're also probably in the wrong church. If you want to leave, you can now. Let me start with some stats, because there's been this incredible rise in anxiety. Life Education Trust, that's a New Zealand trust, did a survey of 2,500 primary and intermediate school principals, deputies and teachers, and found that anxiety was the biggest issue in New Zealand schools. And actually, really interestingly, because we have stats from Southland, which is quite unusual in terms of the stats, 92% of those surveyed in Southland said it was a major concern. It was the biggest issue in New Zealand schools, ahead of vaping, ahead of bullying, and ahead of porn. They added anxiety to their list of issues in 2013, and each year it has risen. Chief Executive John O'Connell said symptoms of anxiety differed, but could include a difficulty to engage socially, lashing out, or withdrawal from situations. Teachers are having to deal with more and more behavioural issues because children are not equipped to manage the most stressful situations they find themselves in. Ministry of Health stats said over half of all New Zealanders between 15 and 24 experience anxiety or depression. And those numbers have doubled over the last 10 years. And they suggested factors like social media and wider global concerns are contributors to youth anxiety. Some other stats, 34.8%, so that's just over a third of New Zealand adults of all ages experience mild or greater anxiety or depression symptoms in the past 2 weeks. That has risen again significantly from 2016. The National Library of Medicine, which is an American journal, said that the global incidence of anxiety disorders has increased by 52% over a 10-year period. So this issue is a significant issue within our society today. There is, though, an extra challenge for Christians with this issue. See, we have these stats on the rise of anxiety, but Christians face this extra challenge, and that is that often our faith and our church community can make things worse and not better. Here are 5 common myths in Christian circles around anxiety. First is anxiety is a sin. Anxiety is just a lack of faith. Only weak people suffer anxiety. True Christians don't get anxious. If I use medication, then I'm not fully relying on God. Now, all of these myths leave the Christian who's struggling with anxiety in a worse position. They feel shame and condemnation. And because those maybe around them who are Christians don't understand anxiety, they find themselves openly or privately judged. Their anxiety as Christians is causing them to pull out of engagements, sometimes at the last minute. maybe avoid church altogether, or leave early after church rather than having to engage with others. And verses that talk about anxiety in the Bible sort of become weaponized and make people feel worse. Just give it to God, just trust in Him. So Christians with anxiety, their faith and their faith community sometimes often only adds to their pain, and they suffer in secret. So I want to look at what anxiety is and how it works. And the problem I discovered right at the beginning of researching this message is that for the average person, we sort of use stress and worry and fear sort of interchangeably. And they're linked. And I'm going to talk about a little bit just the subtle differences between them. But stress and anxiety and worry are responses to being human and living in a fallen world. But sometimes those responses can get out of control and impact our ability to live. They end up crippling us. And anxiety can impact someone at any stage of life, from really young to really old. And it can impact people who are introverts or extroverts or rich people, poor people, male, female, makes no difference at all. So let me just unpack in really simple terms just how this thing works. So fear is what we experienced when we were taking a walk in Queen's Park, and suddenly a lion jumps out in our path. All right, imagine just walking along Queen's Park, one of the pathways there, and suddenly we see a lion. Ah! All right, so that's fear. Fear is based on the probability that this lion is going to hurt us. And what happens instantly that the lion has jumped out on your path is that your body responds to this danger. And typically it's with a fight or flight response. Now there are other responses, including freezing, but typically it's a fight or flight response. And within us there's three different responses. There's a physical response, a behavioural response, and a cognitive response. So just unpack this a little bit. What happens is when that lion is there, suddenly our brain sends signals to our autonomic nervous system. Now, if this loses you, just don't panic. But our autonomic nervous system has two parts, a sympathetic part and a parasympathetic part. Okay, two bits. So the sympathetic side activates us for danger, and it releases these chemicals in our adrenal gland, and suddenly our heart beats faster, which it would with the lion there. Suddenly blood flow shifts, so we find ourselves going pale at the sight of the lion. And you think, why does that happen? Well, that'll help you not bleed to death when the lion mauls you. All right? That's quite useful. It impacts your breathing, so you feel tight, and your chest feels tight, shortness of breath. It's preparing the body for action. You start sweating. That'll make you slippery. The lion might struggle to eat you. Your pupils get bigger, and so you see better in the dark. Your digestive system slows because your body does not need to digest your lunch when it has about to be eaten by the lion. All right, so that's not really priority for your body, and so you get a dry mouth and your muscles tense, ready for fight or flight. You might shake or feel tense. So all those things happen automatically in your body. It also impacts your behavioural system. So when we feel anxious, we want to fight or run, but taking away the lion for a minute, in some situations that maybe is not appropriate. So we just might sort of lash out verbally, or we might snap at people or pace up and down. So our behaviour is impacted. And your brain, your cognitive system is impacted as well. You can't think about anything else when you're faced with this lion, and so you can't concentrate on anything else. All you're worried about is the lion. So when you meet that lion in Queen's Park, your God-designed body does all those things automatically. You don't choose them, it just does it. Now let's imagine for a minute this scenario, and then after a minute you realise that it's not a real lion. It's some giant-sized puppet that some prankster has put there, and it's fluffy and it roars, but it's not real, it's a puppet. Well, your autonomic nervous system goes on the other side, the parasympathetic side, and it releases chemicals and everything calms down again. It reverses the changes in your body. Your heart rate slows down, your muscles relax, and the blood comes back to your face again. But we all know that that's not instant. You've got this terrible fright of this line, your heart's beating for 5 minutes, too fast, because it takes a while to sort of calm down after that fear. And that's a protection mechanism for our system. So fear is an appropriate response to the lion in the park. Anxiety is when we feel the same kind of responses in our body as fear, even though there is no lion in the park. Anxiety is more about the sense of there being danger and our body reacting to that, even though there might not be any danger. So we're anticipating a poor job review. And we feel anxious, even though we haven't had the review yet, can trigger that fight or flight response. Now, an anxiety disorder is when the frequency and severity of our feelings of anxiety start impacting our normal everyday life. What causes it? Well, there's a biological component. So some families seem more prone, or some people in family lines can be more prone to anxiety than others. And there's physiological factors, our life experience, the trauma we've had in the past, our upbringing, our behaviours, and our thinking. Let me give you a very simple example. A few years ago, many of you know I hurt my back. This is before the infamous ladder incident in the foyer. Before that, I was shifting a piano at our house and I blew out a disc in my lower back. Now, ACC were very good, came to a party, and I went up to Christchurch and had surgery to fix my back. But about a year, maybe a bit longer, I tweaked my back again. My back suddenly started causing, it was very, very sore. And I was really concerned I'd done some more damage to my back, and so I went to the physio who poked and prodded me and said, no, you've just minorly strained your back. Now, the pain did not feel minor. It was significant. But they said, your back is just reacting to the previous trauma. The nerves have reacted to a minor strain, and they're sending lots of pain signals to you instead of just a minor bit of pain. They're remembering the serious trauma. They said it'll settle down in 6 to 8 weeks, which it did, without doing anything at all. Now, that's how trauma can affect our nervous systems as well. The body remembers past trauma, which was real and significant. And when we're faced suddenly with something smaller or something that just triggers that, it might be a smell, a sight, a person, or whatever, suddenly it can trigger a major response in our body. Anxiety, a panic attack, crippling fear. So, just to really simplify this, fear is our body's response to real danger. Stress is when our bodies react to a challenge or change in our environment. Maybe work, study demands, life, death, divorce, whatever. Just similar to anxiety, can have similar physical symptoms, headaches, sore stomach, etc. But with stress, we can identify what is the thing causing me stress, and we can work to find solutions. Worry is when our thoughts go round and round and round, continually thinking about an issue, often something in the future. But, did I leave the iron on? Who said that when they've driven out the door? Who's left the iron on? Have I left the iron on? What happens if the house burns down and we go on a spin? Start worrying. So worry is about our thoughts. Stress is about a change in circumstances that leave us feeling as if we can't cope. Anxiety is an emotion that continually feeling on edge, triggering our flight and flight response. Depression is a low mood and loss of enjoyment. So there's a significant overlap between these, but there are some differences. So the issue is, where does faith sit with all this? Where does faith sit with the anxiety? First of all, spirituality is a part of the healing process, but it's not the whole process, because anxiety is related to our bodies and our psyche. The trouble is that many years ago, both philosophers in the Enlightenment period and even before that, way back in the sort of Greek time, Christians and philosophers separated out our religion and the physical world. They separated them into two realms, the physical realm and the spiritual realm. And so they split science and religion. And so that led to some real stigma around issues like mental health. The reality is that the Bible doesn't talk about this split, and that's not how things work. The physical our bodies, our minds, our emotions, and our spirits, and those realms are highly interrelated. If we break a leg, we don't say to someone, let me pray for you and everything will be all right. That would be silly. No, we take them to the doctor, who takes an x-ray, puts them in a cast, and sends us away, and amazingly, the body heals itself. That is amazing. It's done. Now, where is God in that process? Well, He's everywhere. He designed our bodies in such a way to allow for the fact that we might fall off ladders. He allowed for that. He allowed for the fact that we might get hurt in some way. God allowed that. And He designed the universe in such a way that we can figure out how it works. God could have designed the universe a bit like an Apple phone that's a closed system that you can't open, you can't tinker with, and it's just closed, apart from special Apple people. But no, God designed the world in such a way that we learned how it works. And we can invent machines to help, and we humans have figured out how our body works. He's created our bodies as it were open source. Where does our faith come when we break a leg? Well, it can help us in the healing process by awareness that God is with us in the pain and in the struggle. Our faith can help us when maybe our leg isn't going to heal properly and we're going to, walk with a limp or whatever, but we also live with the hope of the resurrection, that one day we're going to be made new. Studies have shown, a number of studies have shown that faith absolutely helps in terms of physical healing. So our bodies are these incredibly complex things, both physical and psychological and emotional and spiritual components. And healing involves all of those elements. So medication might be a useful tool because it creates space for us to deal with any underlying issues. If you're crippled by anxiety, it's very difficult to deal with something like past trauma. So medication can be helpful. And as well, medication can deal with any biological issues. Talking to a counsellor can be really helpful with dealing with anxiety, particularly around patterns of thinking and around trauma. One of the sites I visited for this series listed 5 habits that they said, 5 common habits that can increase anxiety. And then they annoyingly said there are 2 more, but you've got to sign up and pay X amount of money to find the other 2, which really annoyed me. But guess what the 5 habits, 5 very simple habits can add to anxiety? Take a shot. Caffeine. Oh, bother, that was my last one. Yes, caffeine. That's right. That's the physio. Yes, too much caffeine. That was one on the list. So coffee sales will be down after church. Yeah, what are the other ones? Sleep. Yeah, lack of sleep. Yep. Social media. Yep. 3. I suspect that was one of the ones that they didn't. that I had to sign up to find because that's how I thought of that. Yep. Yep. 2 more. No. Too busy? Yeah, food. Poor eating. Too busy. Too much screen time. So, now none of those issues are, now they can add to anxiety, contribute to anxiety. None of them are particularly spiritual habits. They're simple physical habits. But God is entwined in all elements of healing. The second point I want to make really clearly is that anxiety is not a sin. Theologically, for something to be a sin, it must come from a person's free will. People who struggle with anxiety don't choose that. It comes from a combination of biology and their upbringing and circumstances, and the way that God has designed our bodies. So infirmities are not a sin. To equate them with a sin just adds more shame and so makes the problem even worse. Now, it's true that our choices can help or hinder anxiety, and sin can lead to anxiety. That's true. But anxiety in the end is a product of being human and living in a human world. Anxiety does not mean you're defective. It doesn't mean you're going crazy, although sometimes people who suddenly find themselves grappling with anxiety feel like they're going crazy. It doesn't mean you're lacking in faith or that you're not Christian enough. The third point I want to make about this issue of anxiety is that the faith community can, and you see the can there is in italics, can be a place of healing and acceptance. But tragically, it's often not. Sometimes it's a place of condemnation and judgment. Sometimes that's with words and behaviours. We use Bible verses as a weapon and we speak out of ignorance. But other times, it's not a healing place by what's not said. Because if we always pretend to have it all together, we leave no room for the one who does not have it all together. We create an unsafe space by what we don't say as much as by what we say. So it's really encouraging. A number of people have volunteered to give testimonies, and Peter is going to come in a minute and give testimony, which is hugely encouraging. The gospel is one of grace. And that grace says we're not defined by our struggles, but by what Christ has done on the cross. And we're very easy at forgetting that. We might not struggle with anxiety, but all of us carry wounds and pains, both physical and emotional. We have to treat people with the utmost dignity and respect. We have not walked their journey. We don't truly understand their struggle, but we can affirm who a person is in Christ. We can speak words that build up and so challenge the negative thoughts that are being grappled with. We can minister Christ's comfort by standing with and weeping with those who weep. We can avoid being critical when others don't seem to be progressing or when they don't make the changes we think they should make. We don't demand change because change in the end is a work of the Spirit, not a work of the law. And when people who are anxious about being anxious find their anxiety is ramped up again and they feel wretched and a failure again, we can remind them again that God is merciful and gracious and that we're safe in Him even when it doesn't feel that way. Those who experience panic attacks and anxiety say it's absolutely awful. We need to see it as a privilege and a responsibility to be present to those who are struggling. Now, Peter's volunteered to come and share a brief testimony. So thank you, Peter. Really appreciate you coming. You're going to clap before you speak. You're going to clap before you speak. So you sit down now.
When Keith asked for volunteers to talk about their personal experiences around anxiety, I thought, okay, why not? I realised that everybody's experiences concerning mental health are different, and big disclaimer here, I'm no expert on it. It's just been a lived experience, really, over the years. But there are always opportunities to learn from each other. So that's why I'm speaking today. And then he asked, would I go first? And I thought, oh, gosh, shoot the cat. That's a bit quick, but okay, here goes. I also felt that limiting it to 4 or 5 minutes was going to be tricky. I can waffle a little bit. So I thought I would adopt the question-answer idea that we saw earlier. So we heard the fast 5. This is the anxious 6. Okay? All right, just to keep me on track. So let's get started. For context, Peter, what is your background? Briefly. So I'm Peter Boone, High Church, and I've just turned 60. I grew up in a Christian home and gave my life to the Lord in Boys Brigade. In many ways, I had a very normal, enjoyable youth. And to top it off, met Val at high school, and we went nursing training together, and got married. And we've got 4 kids and 8 grandkids. Number 2, Peter, when did you first struggle with anxiety? Well, as Keith very eloquently spoke about, everybody has anxieties and troubles. Mine was no different. But I'm sort of thinking about things that maybe caused it to escalate in my life. And I think I do have a tendency to be anxious. My mum was very anxious as a person as well. So as the family grew and as I got involved in more demanding work situations, that's when I encountered sort of anxiety as more of a mental health issue. I was nursing in a busy emergency department. And I mean, there were some really confronting things that were coming through the door during that time, though I did certainly find it enjoyable most of the time, and the staff were wonderful. But the unpredictability of the work was certainly taking its toll on me. I mean, what could come through that door? How would I manage? And also looking back, a significant triggering factor was also at that time that I encountered bullying from a senior staff member. And I think that escalated the tension and anxiety, what's it going to be like that day, and how will I cope through it? Number 3, how would I describe my feelings of anxiety? Okay, very many of the symptoms I'm experiencing right now. It's really the same as any stressful environment, stressful situation, like feeling a little panicky, racing heart and mind, the sort of things that Keith talked about. A dry mouth, sweaty, and it's often associated with maybe feeling inadequate to what you're doing. But as Keith said, for me too, the differences was that this was becoming chronic. And the feelings of anxiety were often disproportionate to actually what was going on in my life. And this was alarming. And I certainly noticed this cycle in my life where the anxiety would escalate, and I'd be running on adrenaline, and suddenly I would become exhausted and depressed. And I would cycle through this, not really understanding what was happening. I've got strong memories of being absolutely flat and depressed at home and having the kids running around me, all 4 kids running around me and I was there but I was not there. I was like a shadow in the room. And it was an awful experience, and poor Val trying to manage them and me as best she could. In many ways at work and home, I was still coping, but and certainly unless they were close to me, people probably would not have recognised that I was struggling with anxiety. But look, it wasn't a great way to live, and things needed to be changed. So, let's start with what sort of things didn't help, all right, over that time. So, my initial strategies included just increasing those spiritual disciplines that I'd grown up with. I'd been a Christian a long time, and I kind of expected that to solve it. I expected if I prayed more, if I studied the scriptures, if I praised more, if I got into music more, surely that would solve it. And what a testimony that would be, to my colleagues and friends about how my faith had solved this mental health issue I was going through. But it sort of didn't. And as the months went by, I was really quite surprised and annoyed at God that he sort of didn't come on his white charger and solve this issue. And it certainly seems a bit naive now because, God was working in the background. There's no question about that. But my expectations were not right. And as Keith said, and this can happen, and it's not in any way a judgment on the church scene I was involved with, but for me, it no longer felt a particularly calm or safe place to be. I think I just found church just had certain expectations I just felt I couldn't meet at that time. And the doubts increased. Can a real Christian experience anxiety? Is it just my lack of faith? My Christian faith honestly felt a bit undermined and irrelevant. But as I said, looking back, God was certainly working there. He wasn't going to put a plaster on it. He was going to get to the bottom of it and give me some tools to work through it. Personally, I tried in conjunction with medical team and doctors, my GP, I tried medication a couple of times. But for me, it didn't seem to help. It helps many people, but for me, it just didn't seem to help. But what did help? Well, my friends and family were incredibly supportive, and that was so important. My memories are of Val being disturbed in the middle of the night as my brain was rushing and roaring around, and she would pray for me, and it would settle and help me sleep because poor sleep was devastating. My best mate Graham, who's not actually here today, Graham, I can remember him having a rather distraught friend on the doorstep one evening. I was just not managing, and he showed real grace and his quirky sense of humour, which I always enjoy, to help just get me through that time and talk through it. So that was really important. Church itself was a bit of a struggle, as I said, but actually home group was a vital link. It was having a small group of Christian friends who you really felt you could just be yourself, and also would understand if you just needed some time away from contact for a while, but you knew they were praying for you. Shortly after that, I shifted into nurse education away from emergency, the department, but anxiety just came with me. And I must say I had a new boss who was an amazingly wise and caring lady, passed away a couple of years ago, and she understood what was happening. She seemed to be able to just read me, and she ensured that, number one, I had time away when I needed it without feeling bad, and she also encouraged me to get help. And in fact, Val and I would come home and sometimes find a parcel of food on the doorstep from her. It was just remarkable, plus a bottle of wine. Now, alcohol is not the solution, folks, okay? Just saying that. The thing that really seemed to help was getting counselling, and I was absolutely blessed. I could see God's hand in it, that I was assigned to a Christian counsellor who just really got it. She didn't have all the answers, but she was able to just point me in directions and help me find some tools. And these tools were around how I would recognise and write down some of these thought streams that were driving the anxiety. All right? For me, I needed to write it down. And then I would learn through this therapy to write to myself a much more measured and reasonable response to what was driving this anxiety. And after a while, it took a long time, but eventually that writing became relatively redundant. I still go back to it if I run into problems. If I get myself into a bad spot, I'll go back to those tools again. But actually after a while, my thought processes changed, and I found a much more reasonable way to deal with things. I also had to learn to balance my life a little bit better, good boundaries, a bit of exercise, all those things that are good for your mental health as well. There's lots to learn around that. Last question. If it was possible, what advice would you give to your 30-year-old self, besides buying some real estate in Kelvin Heights or something like that? Number one, be kind to yourself. Manage your expectations as best you can. Be reasonable in what life throws at you. Number two, in times of distress, turn towards those people who are important to you, not away from them. Unfortunately, when you go through cycles of anxiety and sometimes depression, it's easy and very tempting to turn away. And it's actually those times you deliberately need to turn towards them, including God. It might be tempting to hide, but this is best viewed as a shared journey if you can. Number three, get professional help. As the great John Kerman once said, if they don't get it, find somebody else who does. All right, keep trying, keep pushing, prayerfully to find the right person who will help. In conclusion, in God's plan, no experience goes to waste. Anxiety is a thing, and as we saw, an increasingly common problem, Christian, non-Christian, young and old. I know that I've had opportunities to support others who have been going through this and pass on the tools that I learned, and that I think is where I see God's hand through this. So thank you.
Does the team want to come up the front just as I conclude? My last point is that anxiety can be seen as an invitation rather than something that's keeping us from God. Any struggle or pain that we go through also can be an invitation to draw into God. Typically, we just want God, as Peter said, we just want God to take it away, whatever the issue is. And sometimes God miraculously does. But often we walk a journey, and that journey seems like sometimes we take one step forward and two back. But any pain is an invitation to come to God in your struggle. It's an opportunity to experience grace. And often, as Peter said, we experience that grace through other people. That's how we experience grace. It's an opportunity to know that God identifies with your pain. He doesn't shout or condemn or act superior. He wants you to experience his tender and hearted embrace in pain. After Jesus died, we read that in John that Mary went to the tomb and found it empty. She was already overcome with grief, and now anxiety was being compounded by the fact that the tomb was empty. She turned to leave, and she saw someone standing there who she thought was the gardener, and the gardener, who wasn't the gardener, said, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" She said, "Sir, if you've taken him away, tell me where you've put him." And Jesus said, "Mary." And she suddenly recognized who it was. And that voice that spoke her name, not with a rebuke, not with condemnation, but with utter love and tenderness, spoke Mary's name. The pain is an invitation to come to Jesus and hear him speak your name in that same voice. Next week I'm going to unpack some scriptures. Today I sort of set some context for it and also look at some practices that can be helpful. There will be opportunity afterwards. I'll ask some of the prayer team to be at the front. If anyone would like prayer, we would love to pray for you. Does anyone have any questions? Briefly, I'll do more time for questions next week. Does anyone have any questions around this topic? Remembering I'm not an expert on the subject. No questions. All right. Let me pray and then I'll hand over to the team. Where's the team leader? Oh, there, sorry. No to panic there. God, I lift up anyone who is here this morning and just grappling with anxiety. Might be mild, it might be significant, but Lord, I pray, Lord, that you would see their struggle. And Lord, that you'd lead them to people, to tools, to practices, to yourself, Lord God, but to places where they can find relief and can find healing. God, we acknowledge that all good things come from you. Every good thing comes from you. And that you are in every part of our lives. There's no realm that's excluded from you. So God, I pray for every person that's here this morning, God, lead them into a pathway of peace. In Jesus' name, amen.